Alright, so our goal today, everybody, is to get a coat of black and white and grayscale on this. We don't need to worry about the background. We can do that later. Unless you've got a black, white, or gray background, in which case you can definitely do it right now. Heck, why not? I'm going to use my palette knife because I've got a palette knife. If you don't have a palette knife, you can just use your brush. But the palette knife's really nice for mixing paint. So I'm going to mix some paint, some retarder here. I'm trying to get like a medium gray. And this would be much better for mixing paint if I had actually scraped off my palette, which I did not do. That's okay. I want kind of a thinner medium gray, so I might add a little bit of water to this, or just kind of mix it with my brush. Alright, so I've got kind of a medium gray tone. I've got some retarder up here. Can't really see that very well anymore. I've got some white and some black. And I'll mix different tones in between. Wipe off my palette knife. And start working. So I'm going to wet this a little bit. I'm going to try to thin out this gray until I can kind of see through it. That's probably about right. So I'm just going to pick an area to start. I'll probably do one area at a time. If I was oil painting, I might do the whole face to start. But because I'm using acrylic paint and they dry a little faster, I might just kind of work it piecemeal. The hard part about working at piecemeal is your color consistency, because you're going to end up mixing different colors quite likely when you do one area and then the next and then the next. With the grayscale, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. That's kind of one of the reasons we're doing it this way. Okay, this should be good. So I'm just going to lay down some thin gray. I want to be able to see my painting through it as usual. I'm just going to do the forehead first. That seems like as good a place to start as any. I'm just kind of getting a wet base on there. I want there to be plenty of retarder in here. And I want it to be wet. And the idea is to just kind of almost sort of lubricate the paper a little bit, the surface, so that it's easier to move the paint around and get good gradations. All right, so I use my big brush for this, a relatively big brush. Oh, where should I put my brushes? That seems like as good a place as any. I should have a used brush jar, but I don't. Got some outside. Alright, so now I'm gonna move my image a little bit. I'm gonna start getting some of those transitions. Alright, so I've got a highlight here, so I'm gonna apply some white paint there. And then I'm gonna kind of pull it out from there. So I want to kind of think about my highlights and kind of pull them out. I'm going to be using one brush for highlights and one for darker tones. And that way you don't have to worry as much about paint being loaded up in the brush. So that lightened it a little bit. That's not as light as I want to get, but I can build it up. Alright, I've got a little bit of shadow on this side and a little bit less over here. I don't think I want to go with a full black there. I think I want to mix kind of a gray. So I'm going to take some of my black and add a little bit of white to it. And a little darker than that. I'm going to kind of spread out some gray up here and make some different values. I'm just going to kind of spread a line of gray on my palette. I'll add a little more black to this side. And as I build up more tones, I'll add white to the other side. Alright, so that's not quite black, but it's pretty dark. And pull a little bit of that in. And I'm going to get this guy back in and use him to mix. It's getting real dark. Maybe a little water to spread that a little bit more. So looking at your black and white acrylic portraits that we did before, the main errors that I'm seeing are there's some drawing errors. So some of the proportions and placement are off. Some of the shapes are off. There was also probably a lot of them did not really have enough buildup of paint. So what most people did a good job on was keeping the paint really thin and building it up slowly. But I do eventually want it to get built up to where it's fairly thick. So don't stop when you have just one thin layer on, but kind of build it up after that. So you want to do layer by layer, and you want to do thin layers, but you want to have a bunch of layers. All right. So if we're shading a curved surface, we've got, it's called gradation. Gradation is a gradual change from light to dark. So we have like a highlight out here, but it slowly fades to darkness as it moves out. I'm going to kind of block in these eyebrows now, I think. Might actually be a smart idea to sort of ignore them for the time being, but I'm not going to be smart. Might just block in the dark parts. I'm going to block in the... That's not even that dark on the outside. I'm just going to block in that part of the eyebrow. I probably should just leave the eyebrows and ignore them for now, if I was being smart. All right. So we want to be careful about loading the brushes up too much. So it's a good idea to wash them off every once in a while. So maybe we'll do one side of the face together, and then you can kind of extrapolate how to do the rest from there. So let me clean these off real quick. All right, so now we're going to add a little more of a gray tone. We'll do kind of the left eye area. So I'm working left to right because I'm right-handed, and that makes me put my hand in mess a little bit less often. If you're left-handed, maybe go the opposite direction. Should kind of be the same idea. So I'm going to go ahead and add my gray. I don't really need to be precious with this. As long as it's thin enough to see through, I can just kind of cover the whole thing and it's no problem. Woo! That was too thick. I'm going to wipe off some of that, and then wipe off some of this. So I think it's really useful when you first start painting to learn how to add things in layers, because a lot of us have much better drawing skills than painting skills. And so we can do these really nice drawings maybe, but our paintings are maybe a little bit lacking. And so if we build this up in slow layers, we can really use the drawing skill as a support for the painting. I'm going to do the shadows first on this one, I think. I'm going to just start with something a little bit lighter than last time. If you wanted to, you could block in your shadows before you glazed it with the gray tone. That might be a smart idea. Might experiment with that next time. And that way, it kind of makes it easier to see through the gray if you're having difficulty with that. All right, so there's my shadow. I'm going to transition it. But the idea is that we, to the degree that we're capable, we try to use all our materials the same way, so that our skill with each one supports us in using the other materials. All right, so I've got a strong kind of highlight right here. A little bit right here. Even with the retarder, this is drying pretty quickly. The paper's still pretty thirsty. You have to be kind of quick. I like what's happening with that tone right there, but I need to soften it just a little bit. See, I should have gone in and gotten more shadows first, because there's still some I'm not getting. I think what I'm going to do is just kind of ignore. And another good thing to think about is, like, imagine you're kind of sculpting clay with your brush. Gotta have that same sort of touch. I think what I was going to say, I'm going to ignore the eyebrows, I think. Let me add a little bit of water to everything up here. Oh, that's a little dark. Alright, so when I apply my pigment, if I sense that it's like a little bit dark, I won't necessarily shade the whole area. I'll just put a little bit on and then move it around. We probably want like maybe a little extra contrast in this image because we're going to put a layer of color on top of this, and we want this to be strong enough to cut through that. Alright, so now I want kind of a more medium gray. I'm going to cut this line at the top of the eyelid. The reason I want a more medium gray is this is kind of a subtle fold. If I go too dark with it, it's going to be a problem. So I think I'm going to try to add the whites of the eyes now, and then I'll add the black areas. I think that'll be more accurate to do it in that order. But I might actually dab this in first and let it dry a little bit. So one thing with the eyes is the eyes aren't really white usually. They're kind of like a very light fleshy color. You can't necessarily see it in your image, but if you like isolate the eye and drop her out the color in Photoshop, you'll be able to tell that it's really, what's the word? It's not quite white. It's off white. All right, so let's try to chunk in that black, but let's see if there are any other highlights I need to capture first. I think I've got a little one kind of happening right here. So I like these filbert brushes a lot. That's the kind that has like a rounded tip, kind of a rounded flat, because you can paint this way and get kind of a wide stroke, or you can paint this way and get a nice edge. So they end up being pretty handy. I think this needs more white in general, just all over. Get some paint off my brush. All right, so let's try to block in some of that black. I'm try to get a nice viscous black. I think that should be good. I'm just going to do the eyes black for now because they're pretty dark, and I'll just add color later. And I'm not going to worry about the highlights. I'll just paint right over them and paint them in again later. Why did I draw them in? Good question. I'm not sure anymore. So I think I'll leave the whites of the eye like fairly white for now, and just kind of lower the value a little bit using color later on. Just add like a little bit of pink or a little bit of flesh tone to them. Should probably not worry too much about eyelashes right now. Kind of save that for, I don't know, end details, really. But it's okay. Yeah, I kind of messed that up. But that's alright. If I can cut in a fine line, I should actually probably. Instead of being stupid, let's try being smart. How about that? Use my round brush. So round brushes are really good for fine lines. So I typically only have round brushes in very small sizes. Brush sizes go below 0, so this is a 0 right here. But they go below 0 as well. And usually I like to have one round brush that's kind of somewhere below 0 for doing fine lines. Most of my details I can get with a filbert. Every once in a while you have something that requires a round brush, especially in the eyes. All sorts of hard to get details in the eyes. Let's move on to that nose here. All right. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and glaze this. I'm just going to get the nose for now. It should be plenty. Ooh, that's a lot. It's a lot more paint than I need. And I also probably should try to avoid smearing it onto work I've already done. So, dang, I've like kind of lost all my information in here. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this, I'm just going to dab it. Dab it a little bit. I can get some of that back. And also try washing it a little bit and lifting with a wet brush or moving it around. That's okay though. It's not ideal, but I can work with it. So now I'm going to try to clean this off so I can use it to blend a little bit. I thought I had a nice blending brush. I may have switched the brushes I was using. Alright, so I'm going to try to define some of the darker areas. So I've got kind of a medium dark curve of the nose right here. Sunlight's starting to hit the painting directly, and that's not working out for me. That kind of transitions into here. Then there's kind of a medium sneak up there. Now I've got the nostrils, which are quite dark. I need some better lights in here is what I need. Alright, now we've got the other nostril over here. Alright, this one is quite a bit lighter. Maybe even add a little bit of white and mix that in. Yeah, that's a pretty good tone. Find that. Kind of works its way up there. So it's alright if our initial pass is kind of off. This is about making multiple passes and almost like reaching a consensus about what's right eventually. So when we layer them, they each get to have their input and the input gets kept. but the final input is what ends up staying, or what ends up having the most influence. We'll add some highlights. Do I need to add any more dark areas? I think maybe a little medium on the side here. Coming into this area. Might be a little too dark though. It's a little too dark, but that's okay. We can work with it. All right, so soften this a little bit. All right, so which one's my light one? If I can't tell which one's my light one, it's probably time to wash my brush. Okay, so I've got a real light highlight right here, so that's where I want to start. I'm probably going to have to hit that again, so I probably just want to start with that. And then I've got kind of a highlight that goes all the way down the bridge of the nose. The most intense part of it is a little bit on the right-hand side, so I'll kind of apply pigment to the most intense section and then kind of mix it, blend it in. I may have to repeat that a couple of times. Sometimes you can get better highlights if you stipple, so you kind of dab the brush. Helps get a little thicker paint on there. You don't necessarily want it to be too thick. You don't necessarily want it to get thick enough where it becomes textural, but a little bit of extra is handy. Still want to use my pigment brush to mix it. There we go. It's a little better. So now I've kind of run out of pigment on my brush, but I've got a little on the other side, so I can flip it like this. Paints again. That's the other thing. You have to start being aware of where the pigment is on your brush. You have to know how much you've got on there. You have to know where it is. All right, so I've got some higher notes in the nostrils here. Maybe right here, maybe right here, right here. All right, so I can tell there's too much pigment on this brush for me to like blend these colors in. So I'm just kind of dabbing pigment on the highest highlights. And then I wipe off my brush. Then I come in and kind of mix it around and pull it to different places it needs to go. This to be a gradual transition here. I think there's a little bit of a tonal decrease there. All right. I think this kind of transitions a little more slowly. I'm going to add some more pigment here. Try to get this transition a little smoother. It's a little less abrupt. And I've got a little more pigment in my brush still, and I think this gets a little more highlighty, so I'm going to kind of hit this as well. All right. Let's try to get the mouth real quick. And then I'm going to let you go async, I think. Alright, so again, I want to make some gray wash. So I'm kind of adding some water and pulling my mixed retarder and gray down here to an area where it's a little bit wetter and thinner. So the retarder keeps it pretty thick. That's kind of one of the ideas. But I want it thin for this, so I do want to add water. So maybe if I do a second pass on this, I'll stop adding water and I won't use washes because my paint will be thick enough that I can do that. For the first pass, I want to use water and have it nice and washy so I can see through. If things get too contrasty, like the difference between my black and whites is too much, and maybe like this edge is too hard, I can go over with another pass of gray wash, and that'll kind of unify it a little bit. So I can make it real thin if I need a minor adjustment, or I can make it quite thick if I need a larger adjustment. I would ideally have another brush this size to kind of blend my pigments together, but I don't have one here. Wasn't paying attention. Alright, so I've got a slightly dark, oops, we need a little more water to get this flowing. I think my funky black paint is starting to dry out. Good. Got a little bit of a dark outline to the lips. Maybe a little bit of shadow. I'm not sure. I'm going to darken that a little bit. It's only like subtly dark. It's not real dark. Oops, that might be a little too dark, but that's alright for now. And then inside of the mouth is also going to be dark. We'll get that line there. I've got a little bit of shadow in this corner. And then a little bit under here. And a little shadow under here. I'm going to clean this off and try to mix those and soften up the edges a little bit. Yeah, that's pretty good. Might be more than I need, but that's alright for now. Oh, but I'm in a perfect spot for this. All right. A little bit of shadow here. Kind of coming up. All right, so now let's add some highlights in. You got the white brush. All right, so I've got a lot of highlights in the lips. Lips are going to be maybe a little bit shiny, so you're maybe going to have some more highlights to them. And the highlights are going to be more dramatic, so we're going to have a little bit less of a gradation or a gradient. Kind of harsher separation in the lips. And I maybe should have graded everything in there a little bit more first. That's okay. I'll get the teeth. So the teeth should either be probably painted in as one chunk or very softly delineated. So I'll show you what I mean. This is something that's worth a little bit of effort. Okay, right now I'm just kind of getting that black out. So I can leave it as one chunk if I want, and I think that's a totally acceptable way of doing it. But if I want to add a little bit of separation, if that's looking too weird, I can get, I just need more paint on there. Hold on, need more paint in my gray strip. I want to get, should probably even go white with this. Yeah, I just want to get a pretty light gray. I don't want to use a black line. That's going to make it look mad, like a scary jack-o'-lantern. So I want like a medium light, I'd say. And then just like really softly sort of separate them. Another thing you can do that will really help to define the teeth without making it like too much is on the mouth here, just make the black of the mouth creep up a little bit. Let's actually use my round brush for that. I really need to get more black paint. This black paint is trash. I'm sorry, guys. I feel so humiliated. And I have like new sets, but none of the sets have black. Alright, but just creep up a little bit with the black part of the mouth so that it just kind of goes up into the spaces between the teeth, just a pinch, like that. And then you'll kind of get teeth that are defined but don't look crazy, which is something we're all working on, right? Oh, we got it. Highlights. I could wait to do that till later. Alright, so I have gone slightly over our synchronous time today. So I'm going to let you go in just a second. I'm going to pop in another attendance sheet. I'm leaving my brushes in my water right now. Don't do that. Take them out. Wipe them. You want to have water in the bristles so they don't dry out, but you don't want to soak them because then your bristles will fall out. But again, since we're not in class, I don't really care. They're your brushes. Do whatever you want. It's just some advice. It's not the rules. All right. Let me grab the attendance sheet. So before you check out today, fill in another attendance sheet for me. And you're welcome to go if you want, or you can hang out. I need to finish this, so I'm going to keep working. Let's pause this for a second. Alright, so I'm going to try to get this chin working. Let's try to get some of the more subtle stuff happening. This looks a little bit lighter in value than I've got it, so I'm just going to put a little bit of pigment on there. I'm going to blend that in with my big brush. My back feels so much better since I started painting at an angle. If you guys can figure out how to do it, it's so much better for you to get your piece on an angle. You're going to see it better, you're going to draw better, and it's going to be ergonomically better for you in most situations. Uh-oh, I dipped my non-pigment brush in my pigment. That's not what I want. I want this brush to be fairly unloaded so that it can move things around without tainting them. But yeah, I mean, it's just so much better to have it at like at least a 45-degree angle. I think like parallel to the direction your face is facing is the optimal. So if I had this almost vertical, that would be the best option, but that's not great for recording. But if you can set it up that way, if you've got a table easel or something, it makes everything so much better. Alright, so I'm going to add a little more of my gray wash. Start working over on the other side. Maybe I'll start up here and work my way down. Oop, this might be a little bit thicker than I want it. That's about right. Oh yeah, that's nice. I can see through that. That's perfect. That's probably enough. I want to try to pick out like logical areas, kind of edges of transitions to end my washes, but it's not super important. Now we're gonna add a little bit of highlight. I'm gonna mix maybe a medium gray, so I don't have to worry so much about mixing white. Add a little bit of this. Yeah. So I'm mixing it to like a medium gray. It's not too white here. That's about right. So I don't necessarily have anything on this side that gets like super high highlight, so I can kind of use more of a light medium gray for my light tone. Again, I think I'm gonna kind of ignore the eyebrows for now and pretend they're not there, and then put them on after I've formed the face. The same way God did. I'm just kidding. In fact, it might even be better to kind of use a light gray now that I'm thinking about it and hit the highlights last. I might try that next time. I do kind of like being able to blend the highlights out though. It's also kind of nice to have a little bit of extra contrast in the black and white layer, because the color is going to kind of mute everything and bring it towards center. It's going to kind of desaturate it. Alright, that's a little bit wetter than I want it to be. Let's see if this is clean. I might be able to soak some of that up. Thirsty brush. There we are. No, I'm going to use my round brush like a smart person this time. Let me dip all these to keep them wet. Switch to the round brush like a smart person. Alright, so I'm going to take a break from the video. If this is all you watch, I think you've got the basic idea. I'm going to stop the video now. I might put the halves back together later, but I want to be able to export it today. So I'm going to end the video here. Just kind of continue on like this, get a black and white layer built up over the whole image.